What's up, ladies and gents? This is K-Sig Kid, coming at you with another Destiny video. Bungie was at it again. They had another live Twitch reveal of Taken King content. Today, they were showing off the Strike Shield Brothers, and they had special guest Mr. Fruit. So I want to talk about some of the things that we learned and some of my opinions on that. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and smack that like button and subscribe to the channel. If you're trying to avoid Taken King content, you probably shouldn't be here. But if you clicked on a Taken King video on YouTube right now, about a few weeks in advance of the Taken King actually releases, chances are you don't really care about spoilers. You're more interested in learning all the cool stuff that we're going to do. First things first, they ended up showing off the subclasses again, and this was actually the first time that we got to see all three of the subclasses with full trees out there. So they had all of the perks unlocked. Mr. Fruit was running around on the Solar Titan, and his big thing was he wanted to create sunspots. So whenever he popped his super, he flung the hammer down into the ground and stood in a sunspot. Whenever he was in there, he ended up having his super drain slower, and he got an overshield, so that was pretty interesting. The Hunter may not be receiving the love it probably deserves, but it did look pretty cool. That tether effect is pretty awesome on the super ability, and you can choose to have it tether more enemies, or when the enemies are tethered, they end up taking damage and sharing that amongst each other. Pretty awesome. Not to mention the smoke pellets. One of the perks you could put on those pellets is to make you and your allies go invisible. Kind of interesting thing. And of course the Arc Warlock, who is who I'm going to pick first. Obviously shooting chain lightning around everywhere, chaining lightning off of your grenades, all cool things. Or you could end up regenerating your super energy just by standing around your buddies. It's kind of an interesting thing. There was definitely a lot of group dynamics at play in there, and that might be something that Bungie is trying to play off of. As far as the Strike, basically the Cabal are running their ship into the Dreadnought. And there's two brothers, Volus Maul and Volus Thurn. Yeah, however you pronounce that. Those two Cabal are leading a force to go ahead and fight orcs. And you're like, okay, why in the world are we stopping them? Both of these guys are our enemies. We would like them to thin their numbers out. Well, okay, except for the fact that apparently the Dreadnought is basically a loot fortress with all kinds of secrets in it, and we don't exactly want it blown up just yet, especially since we're in it. So yeah, we have to kind of do the dirty duty of killing the Cabal to make sure that they don't kill us. So, as you start running around there, one thing we learned really early in the Strike, Mr. Fruit went ahead and he looked over at something. He was like, this is interesting, and he punched it, and it exploded, and it killed him. So don't punch any crazy things on the ground. That's a bad thing. That's a bad thing. So as we started off the Strike, we didn't really notice anything crazy or different. Obviously, we were in a new location, and we're inside the Dreadnought, so that's pretty foreboding looking, and can't wait to see all the different aesthetics that are going on inside there. But the Strike, it started off pretty normally, like any other Strike. But what they did mention was that there are going to be rooms in each Strike. Every Strike, they said. So that means even our old favorites, like right now, the Sepik Strike, that are going to have variable rooms. Meaning, you know, instead of maybe fighting fallen enemies, we might fight taken enemies inside there. Or maybe there'll be Cabal or Vex, something different. There's going to be new enemies in different rooms, these variable rooms, that are also going to spawn out from different locations. So right now we all know where the fallen enemies come out. They come out this doorway, or there are a bunch of shanks that come out here. Maybe a fallen captain comes out from the back end. Some of that stuff is all going to change, just to kind of keep things fresh and keep it more interesting for us. So imagine that you're looking for a gun like the Dry Rod or the Hopscotch Pilgrim, and you know that you've got to do strikes, and you're doing them over and over again. This will keep things just a little bit more interesting, a little bit more fresh, less just turn your brain off and randomly shoot out bullets. So I think that's a pretty cool thing. Nice that Bungie's thinking about replayability, even in something as simple as the strikes. Now, whenever they were doing the strikes, I happened to notice this, and it was glossed over and not talked about at all. But Mr. Fruit picked up something that was called Skyburner's Command Beacon. What is that? I have no idea. It looked kind of like an Ingram when he picked it up. It didn't look like one of the pyramids that are on the ground for whenever you turn into the Cryptarch for consumable glimmer. So it makes me wonder, is this potentially one of those collectible items where you need to collect a whole bunch of them in order to turn it in for a quest? or for an item later. I don't know. They really didn't talk about it. It just felt like a little Easter egg that was kind of shown in there and then glossed over and moved on to the next aspect. Mr. Fruit was like, what is this? Well, I don't know, but I do know that there are going to be things out there that you find in the Dreadnought as you're going around, and this could potentially lead to something bigger later on. So just something to keep in mind. See if we end up learning anything else about items like this or others in the Dreadnought. Something to keep in mind. As they went along the strike, there was another tank, interesting as we're fighting our spider tank over here, but they were in pretty close quarters with the tank, and they ended up taking it down with some teamwork again. Mr. Fruit throwing off some of his Titan hammers, and then we have the Warlock running around. Pretty cool. It looked a lot of fun. And they ended up fighting taken enemies, and they looked pretty awesome. You can kind of notice them by the blue ethereal light that are just floating all around them. Very fun. They also mentioned that the strike bosses have unique attacks, which helps to make them not seem like just big versions of enemies that you're already fighting. And that's really interesting, and I'll touch on that in just a moment. But the thing I liked the most that they talked about was that strike bosses are going to have unique gear. That's right. Unique weapons, unique armor. Will they be legendary? Will they be exotic? I have no idea. All they did was mention that they want you to kind of know where you're going to farm your gear. Instead of it being completely random, now you could look at somebody and be like, hey, where'd you get that gun? You got it from Vala Small? Awesome. I'm going to go ahead and do the strikes to get it from Vala Small. And all this did was instantly make me think of Borderlands. You know, you go to Borderlands and you want the sham. Well, hey, I'm going to go to the bunker and try to farm the sham. If you want the conference call, go over to Handsome Jack. Or maybe you want the Unkempt Herald. Instead of going to Torg's machines, you go and kill Savage Lee. Really interesting. I really dig that. That was probably my favorite thing that I learned about in this entire stream, was that strike bosses are going to have unique gear that you can get. Very cool thing. I like that a whole lot. Now, as I mentioned, the strike bosses have unique attacks of their own. So Vala Small came out and he looked ridiculously awesome. He had these winged thrusters on his back, and what he was doing was jumping in the air and slamming down like Songbird from BioShock. Pretty cool. So that was his special attack. You definitely don't see other Cabal bosses doing that at all. And after a while of shooting Vala Small, he ended up tagging out for his brother, Valus Thurn, and whenever he came in, he was shooting off salvos of missiles that ended up showing rings of area of effect on the ground, so you had to kind of get out of the way of that. After you dealt enough damage to him, he ended up bowing out of the fight as well, and you just had to clear off some ads until both brothers returned. But they didn't return the same. They returned with souped up abilities. So now, whenever Vala Small crashed into the ground, he left his own little sunspot with rings of area of effect damage on the ground to fire, so you don't want to get into that because you're going to burn. And then Thurn came back and he had a shield around him. So not only did the bosses come back and kind of add a little bit of variety because you fought one, you fought the other, then now you're fighting them both at the same time, except for the fact that they now have new abilities. So yes, Bungie is definitely trying to turn things up a notch, try to make things not so vanilla, not so just shoot the guy, he does the same thing, keep shooting the guy. Pretty cool. But I do think it's going to make Nightfalls really tricky. I think you might be wanting to run your Nightfalls with groups of 3, and that's cool. I'm okay with that. I'm definitely okay with running with multiple people. Definitely a fun thing. We also saw the sword in action. We saw the sword blocking some attacks. Keep that in mind. You might be using a sword soon. Overall, I was pretty surprised and pretty happy with the direction Bungie's taking the strikes. I really like the idea of specific loot dropping from bosses, and I can't wait to see the Court of Oryx next week with Laced Up Lauren. It's going to be awesome. So anyway, guys and gals, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, smack that like button. Subscribe to the channel to keep updated on daily Destiny content. Check out these awesome videos. Good luck with your raids, your drops, the Taken King, and I'll see you around in Destiny. Vala Small.